Just gonna wait a second to see if who is here. I know that Anna is supposed to be listening in on today, but I'm going to be doing a lecture. But hopefully there might be some other people who can also pipe in some questions. Oh wait, before I do that, I should in chat make sure you sign in. I should probably not inbox. Here, make sure to sign in. Zoom. Also, if you after we have started, make sure to up.
I'm just on because I got a question or two.
Okay.
I am having a whole headache over these drawing assignments.
Okay.
It's confusing me because it's like 50 million announcements and all the stuff seem like all over the place for us in my modules. So I'm just like lost on like what like I guess understanding how to do this, where to look at for reference and all the things.
Okay, good question. All right. So you're working on which one? Are you working on
The assignment one stuff.
art assignment one? Okay. Not A. Have you already done A yet?
No, because I didn't realize I had an A until I started trying to go submit.
Okay.
So I
Yeah.
gotta go back.
Yeah. So art assignment A, you have until I extended it. It was supposed to be due on Friday, but I extended it till Saturday because of the us being changed over to the different campus platform. But I'll go to share screen and we can look at a couple of different things. Let's see. First off, so in terms of how to do it, let's go to assignments first. And I can just kind of explain some stuff. And you just let me know. There we go. There's everybody. Just let me know if what makes sense. So let's start with art activity A. So in that first one, it's completely open-ended. Like basically the way art activity A works is that like in person, on the very first day of class, I'll give everyone a colored piece of paper that has the art activity A written in a tiny little box on the inside of the paper, right? But it's mostly just colored paper. And on the back side, it has the reaction statement question, it has the reading, right? And then you're supposed to use that piece of paper plus a couple of other colored pieces of paper that you can pick up while you're there in class. And then using those however you want, folding, cutting, drawing on, whatever, just make something, anything. It really does not matter. It's just basically it's an icebreaker assignment. And so I get people who make some cut paper pieces. I get people who draw on the paper almost entirely. I get people who do folded paper things. People make boxes or, little star boxes. All of those are fine. A lot of people like to make the fortune tellers and then to draw on them. And then when you open them up, it has their definition of art on the inside. That's a very common approach. So that's the first art assignment. But then after that, art assignment number one, let's go back to assignments for a second. Art assignment number one is a little bit more based off of the content of the course. Like the first one is just do whatever, just be creative, have fun. So art assignment one is right here, or art activity one. And it says you need to do a grid on a piece of paper and have 4 3x4 boxes. And then in each box, do these four drawings, right? So like in one box, you do a blind contour drawing of your hand. And if you remember from the discussion, I shared some videos in the discussion, and they're also available on like the YouTube page, videos that demonstrate how to do a blind contour. I talk about blind contour in the lecture on drawing. So you draw a blind contour drawing of your hand. In a line drawing, using only 3 lines and using dramatic changes of line weight, draw an apple. Okay? And a cross contour drawing, do a drawing of an apple. And once again, changes of line weight is explained in the lecture on drawing, and what a cross contour drawing is explained in the lecture on drawing. And then from memory, draw your parents' first card. That one is kind of open. You can draw that however you want. But the first 3 are really you just kind of demonstrating, yeah, I looked at the notes, I read the notes, I watched the video on the lecture, and I understood. I looked at the PowerPoint. I understand what you're saying about drawing, about these kinds of drawings, and what changes of line weight are and stuff like that. Okay, so it's like it's less about be brilliant. Like I'm not expecting you to be a master draftsman. I'm just the main thing is can you demonstrate that you learned that one of the things you were supposed to learn from the lecture. Okay. Does that make sense so far?
Yes, in the video you referring to, because when I go through modules, I'm just seeing like the PowerPoints.
Right. No, the videos, and this is under announcements. Like remember those first 8 announcements that I sent? One of the things it states is the videos can be found under pages. You got to go to pages, and then unit one.
Okay, I see the list of all of them. Okay, got it.
Okay, and then there's a bunch of those right there, and you can watch them right there embedded in Canvas, or you can also, like I was saying before, you can also go to the YouTube page for the class. And if you just do a search for ASW Art Appreciation, you'll find the YouTube page. I think I also included a link to the YouTube page if you wanted to. And so you have like all the videos. The main advantage here is that the playlists are longer. They include other people's videos as well. And like a good example of where that might be useful for you is, let's say, on drawing. Oh, shoot, I should have.
Okay, welcome back. So this lecture is
Pause. Thank you very much. We want to look at the playlist instead of, let's go back for a second. Instead of watching the playlist. Where was that playlist again? We want to view full playlist. There we go. This will be easier. Okay, so you can see all the videos here. And so some of these videos are studio videos where people are demonstrating how to do a blind contour. So there's one by me where I demonstrate how to do a blind contour, but there's one by this person right here. And speed it up just a little bit. Now we have to take it, we have to take their word that they're doing this as a blind contour, meaning that they are looking at the person but not looking at their page. But actually it looks like they are, because of like some of the errors and distortions that you get when you're really just kind of following the lines and you're not looking at your page. That's pretty good. Or is it this one? No. Where's the other one that I wanted to show? There's one on blind contour. Oh, it's this one.
We want to do is save hundreds.
Okay, this guy does a very nice job, and he has a. I'm not sure. I'm not a huge fan of his music, but he did an excellent job on that one, and it really gives you a sense of how it's done. Okay. Or say this one, I think they very carefully like show you how to do it, right?
Before I begin to draw,
So see what she's doing right there with like that little dot running along the contour of the line to the hand, right?
Mm-hmm.
What she's talking about is that's what the center of your vision should be doing. And that like when you're looking at your hand and your eyes moving along that line, that's what your pencil should be doing on your paper at the same time. Like the whole point of a blind contour is that you try to like fluid in, make it so that like what your eye is doing and what your hand is doing happen at the exact same time, right? And that every time your eye goes up, your hand goes up. Every time it goes down a little bit, or wrinkles or turns or twists, that's what your hand with the charcoal or the pencil does. Okay, so anyway, there are videos there that help explain doing a blind contour. So that's another resource, but this is all very good questions. There's a whole nother set of resources, which is, I just sent an announcement earlier today. Are we going to go to announcements?
You sent several announcements.
Yes, I did. I did. That's me. I'm constantly wanting to make sure that everyone, but there were two, well, most of the first announcements were all old ones that I just reposted because of the switch, but then I posted two new ones today under announcements. And one of them is this one, announcement X. Announcement X stays up the whole time, and I will try to, um, what am I trying to say? I try to update it all as we're going all through. Anyway, here I have my own demos on some of these topics, right? So I have the hand, the apple, cross contour apple, a drawing of a car. Also some demos on how to do the design analysis type things, other kind of sketchbook images, also some other kind of design assignments. And then I have other examples of artwork to look at. And then on top of that, if you go to Files, and you open up the folder that says Examples of Student Work, there are examples of Art Assignment A. Oh, you see, that's fog. That's very clever. It's kind of like, it's almost like face, but it's also spelling out the word fog. We're waiting for the wheel to spin. I think this is also a fog one. Yeah. So this gives you ideas of like how other people approached a lot of these different assignments. So that's not a great example of a blind contour of a hand, but it shows someone tried it, right? Let's see, we'll wait until we get to a good, oh, that's pretty good, right? So we have a pretty good example of a blind contour, not bad. This is okay, but it's not changing line weight very much. Like it's changing line weight in terms of the apple is darker and then the leaf is lighter, right? A thinner line for the leaf, but there's not much change of line weight otherwise. This is an okay cross contour line, but it's not really wrapping around as well as it could. And this nice little drawing of a car for memory. And let's try the next one. Ooh, pushing it a little bit further. So a lot more thought about the change of line weight on the drawing of the apple. The blind contour of the hand is spot on, right? That's exactly what it should look like. Then one of the things about a blind contour drawing of your hand is it's not supposed to look pretty. It's not supposed to look all that accurate to a hand because it's about learning to train your eye to do something kind of difficult, which is to just really look at the line as your eye moves around that hand. The cross contour of the apple is really nice, and the drawing of the car is also fine. Here's another drawing of fog. This is also pretty good. I especially like the two apples. I think the apple, because I like how this person used a slightly above view on the apples. So it makes the sense of the volume of the apple a little bit more clear. I like also the fact that they told me what kind of car they remember their parent having. That is pretty, that's an old car, a Gremlin. I remember the one I drew was my memory of my dad's old Dodge Dart, and Dodge does not make darts anymore. But they were fine cars back in the 70s. The apple is really nice. I like that apple. And that one is also pretty good. The hand is a little bit underwhelming. Like generally what you want for a good blind contour is a drawing kind of like this one where it flows both on the outside but also goes into the inside, where you're searching both like around the hand rather than a drawing that's just basically an outline, right? Because then you're more really just kind of drawing your memory of what the outline of a hand is rather than really looking. a pretty nice page. I like the change of line weight on that apple. I think the cross contour work on that apple is pretty good. Very nice in that apple. I like that. Change of mind. I like those 2 extra credits because it gives people a chance to be very creative about how they respond. Okay. Anyway, do we need to look at more, or do you feel like, yeah, that answers my question?
That answers my question.
Yeah. So there are resources, and I probably should have mentioned there are resources for you to look at, um, and and there are also videos sometimes that can help you with figuring out like a particular blind contour is especially a tricky one right at the bat because if you've never been introduced to it before, you're just going to be kind of like, what does he mean? Like do a drawing of my hand, but I can't look at the paper. In fact, I think about 50% of the people who've never heard of blind contour, their first reaction is that's impossible. You can't do that. But it is totally possible. Okay, so um, Jasmine, that was your question, right?
Yes.
Do you have any other questions?
No.
Okay, all right. Well, if you do, just let me know, and I am glad to answer any of them. Alea, is it pronounced Alea?
Yes, it's Alea.
Alea. Okay. Do you have any questions?
No, I guess the only question I had was kind of along Jasmine's question was, it's a bit confusing, I guess,
Right.
the announcements, but I'll just go and kind of read them all and
Yeah,
make
you
little
do.
notes.
Yeah, I really do recommend having read like the first 8 announcements either like the day before classes started or the day of, because there's a lot. And if you can read those, it just helps give you a whole picture of the class. Because once you get into the rhythm of like, okay, there's stuff going to be due on Sunday, stuff going to be due on Thursday, like 1 unit on Sunday, 1 unit. And then every unit is basically the same. Every unit is do a homework assignment, do an art activity, do a design sketch, and one of the things also that you'll see is that once we get started, I start kind of pulling back on some of so that like the art assignments aren't assigned all the way to the end, so that towards the end of the class, you have a little bit more time to A, study for the final exam, B, get your final version of your paper done, and C, catch up on anything that you might be behind on. So I kind of ease up on some of those assignments as we get towards the end um, as well. Okay. Um, any other questions before we get into the art history stuff?
And then are there going to be Zooms every day?
No, the schedule is going to be 12:30 on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and 7:30 on Mondays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays. Skipping Wednesday nights because I think that's church night for a lot of people, so kind of makes more sense to do it on Thursday night. And and then I'm going to just try to do like these kind of lectures where I cover some. I'm just going to do them wherever I can fit them into my schedule, and so those will be more kind of like random. But you're free to attend them, and if you want to, like if I would like today, if I was planning on doing a lecture on like wrapping up the art history for Unit 2, but we spend 90% of the time just talking about this kind of stuff, that is totally fine by me because what the questions you need answered are the things that you're going to learn the most, right? So I'd rather spend time addressing the questions that are concerning you right at this moment. Does that kind of make sense? And so I do not mind
Yes,
being
sir.
derailed. So like even if I say 2 o'clock I'm going to be doing an art historical lecture, or 10 o'clock I'm going to be doing an art historical lecture on a topic, right? Like tomorrow I'm going to do at 10 I'm going to do the lecture on ceramics. But if 5 people show up and everyone has a ton of questions, then that's what we're gonna cover. Although tomorrow, actually not so much because we'll be in the middle of the quiz. So during the time period of quizzes, what questions I can answer is more kind of um, it's curtailed. Like I won't be able to answer any questions related to units 1, unit 2, or um, uh, or the quiz. So Okay. So are we all ready? And by the way, Anna, if you want to in the chat, if you want to add any, I know you can't speak right now, but if you wanted to, if you had a question, you could put it in the chat. And the same for you guys as we're going. But as I'm doing the lecture, you might as well just pipe up and say, hey, I have a question about this. All right. So if we don't have any further initial questions, we can go to the lecture. And where am I going to? Ceramics. Right from current slide. Okay, so let's go back just a little bit. Earlier this morning, yeah, at 10 o'clock, I recorded a lecture on, I think Martisha was the only one, but she asked very good questions all along the way. And I did a lecture on the beginnings of civilization in ancient Egypt and ancient Mesopotamia. We talked about Old Kingdom, ancient Egyptian. So let's go to Old Kingdom, ancient Egyptian. We talked about the very founding of a unified Egypt, the uniting of Upper and Lower Egypt. We talked about Palab and so I gave kind of an overview of Egyptian art and Mesopotamian art. And ending with talking about the old Babylonians, the Amorite Babylonians. And that leads to the next lecture, which is kind of a continuation of the art historical lecture, in which I'm talking about what happens next after, like, so we're talking here about the very late Bronze Age, so 13th, 14th century, all the way up to 12th century. So 14th, 13th, 12th century in Bronze Age, Near East, 12, and that's 12th century C or BCE, right? And then we have the Bronze Age collapse, which happens around 1177 or somewhere around that date. There's a famous book titled 1177. So 1177 BCE is when the Bronze Age collapse happens, which is actually the second Bronze Age collapse, but this one is really quite catastrophic, and like trade almost completely shuts down. The existence of writing disappears in many places. The evidence of writing is reduced almost everywhere. The evidence of people living in cities is reduced. A lot of people kind of move out of cities to more kind of semi-rural areas. A lot of people move out from the coastlines into the hill countries of their various regions. Just a lot is happening. And there are some cultures that just disappear entirely, like the Hittite Empire just ends, and the Hittites as a people disappear. So we're going to talk about that. And this is mostly just a historical lecture, but there's some art history to look at, and it's mostly to give you kind of a picture as to what I'm going to be setting up in terms of the Persians and the Greeks, and then we're going to talk about Greek art. But there is some art history that's really important, which is specifically these reliefs from the Palace of Ashurbanipal in Nineveh are especially important, and they do come up in the class, in the test, and the quizzes. Okay, so the way this story works, right, at the very end of the Bronze Age, there were three main empires that were very extremely important. There was the Hittites in Anatolia, the Egyptians, and they ruled most of Egypt, pushed into parts of Libya, parts of what is today Sudan, what was then called Nubia, and into the Levant, what they called Canaan, which would later become Israel, Palestine, right? And then there were the Assyrians who ruled most of the old Akkadian Empire, most of what even before that was like the Sumerian, so Mesopotamia. But they were also expanding. And so here they are all at the height of the power there, and in between them, there's lots of trade. There's also a fourth group, which is there were people who were kind of pre-Greek, these Mycenaean people and these what we call Minoan culture on the island of Crete. And they were also a part of this trade network. There was also city-states in Cyprus that were also a part of this. So these these three big empires aren't everything, but it's a major part of the story. And so at the height of their power, and then all of a sudden everything just kind of falls apart. There were famines, there was droughts, there were earthquakes, and there were invasions by various people. The Egyptians talk about the invasions of the sea peoples, and all of this stuff happening, and it eventually, and cities were burned to the ground. And by the time the 12th century is over, the world is completely changed, and we enter into something like a dark age. And especially in Greece, it truly was a dark age, right? Because in Minoan and Mycenaean Greece, they had writing, and then after the Bronze Age collapse, all writing disappears. When the Greeks return to writing in Greek, they use a completely different alphabetic system that they had borrowed from the Phoenicians much later. Okay, so here's kind of a map of the Bronze Age collapse. The arrows are indicating where we think people were coming in, like probably the Phrygians were coming in from this direction, the Sea Peoples were coming in from this direction. Who the Sea Peoples were, we don't know. There's lots of videos that cover this topic in much greater detail. But afterwards, we get the Iron Age, and out of the ashes, Egypt survives and does okay, but Assyria survives, and actually, Assyria for a while becomes the most important empire in the world. And at their height, at the time when Ashurbanipal was reigning, and shortly after Ashurbanipal, things collapse for the Assyrians entirely. But at their height, things are going pretty well. And I'm mainly, when we look at the Assyrian art, we're looking at it because in some ways it's like the high point of Mesopotamian art. And we're also looking at it because I talk about the dying lioness a lot. I talk about it because it's an example of relief sculpture. I talk about it because of what it tells us about culture and people and how we read into art. There's a lot there. But we're not going to cover that right now. But I just want to make sure you're aware the Dying Lioness by the Neo-Assyrian 640 BCE, that one you're going to need to know. Okay. After the Assyrians, the city of Babylon kind of reemerges as a powerful power. This time, it's a completely different Babylon. This is now a Chaldean, populated and Chaldean run city. So no longer an Amorite city, but it is still Babylon, and they still see themselves as inheriting the whole tradition of Mesopotamia and the whole tradition going all the way back to Sumeria. But then the Babylonians are also conquered this time by the Persians. And the Persians then become the most powerful empire in the world, far surpassing what the Assyrians had done. And their empire, let's go back to one of these maps. So here, right, the Persians occupied all of this, right? All of pretty much right up to the coast in Anatolia, all of Mesopotamia, that the old Assyrian Empire, but even further into Iran, all the way to where my cursor is, even into parts of Arabia, and then all the way into Egypt. Not as far into Libya as Egypt was at this stage, but pretty much the Persian Empire was huge. At the time, it was the largest empire in the world, and yeah, and it seemed, uh, for the first three kings of the Assyrian Empire, it seemed like it was an unstoppable force. It was just going to continue to grow, and that everything would be part of this ever-expanding wealth of the Persian Empire. And then something strange happened. Persia tried to invade Greece, and they failed. And this led to a series of events which made multiple things happen in Greece, led to sort of a flowering of culture in Greece. It also eventually led to the final demise of Greece, but it led to the demise of Greece being taken over by Alexander of Macedon, and then Alexander of Macedon winding up conquering the entire Persian Empire and creating the even larger empire of Alexander, which only lasted his very, very short, brief life. But right now, at this point, we're just talking about the connection where Persia and Greece are just kind of getting aware of each other. And we can see that in the history of their ceramics. So let's talk about Greek ceramics just a little bit. So, Aaliyah, do you have any questions for me?
No, sir, not right now.
Okay. And I noticed that no one has signed into the chat. Jasmine should have. She forgot to. Make sure to sign into the chat. It's important. That way I have a record of who was at which meeting, and I make sure everyone gets credit. Because you want to get the credit and the extra credit that you deserve. So anyway, we have here some examples of Greek ceramics. We have these very old archaic Greek ceramics that are called they're called the geometric style. And this is what, like 750 BCE, this is what Greek ceramics. And then we have here around 500 BC, a style that used to be called Orientalizing influence. That term is less popular now. I prefer the term Persian influence, or just Eastern influence, meaning that it's just the influence from the people who are immediately to the east of the Greeks, primarily the also Greek-speaking people who are on the coast of Anatolia, who were, as well as the Lydians and the Lycians, who were at that time part of the Persian Empire. And so they're picking up Persian influences, and then they're spreading those Persian influences to the Greeks. And that leads to this kind of pottery, where these sort of bands that are much more abstract and geometric, like if you look here at that little window right there, it does not at first look at all figurative, but it is in fact a funeral scene, right? It is multiple people standing, and here are the people below holding up the person who is about to be put on the funeral pyre right there in the center. I can't remember. It might be the burial of Odysseus. I'm not sure. Anyway, we'll move on. So that leads to us talking about ceramics and how we're doing on time. We're doing okay. I'm going to just kind of 10 minutes, just kind of do an overview of what I'm going to cover tomorrow in the ceramics lecture. And so I'm going to be talking about ceramics in terms of a couple of different things. First question, why is ceramics important? Because it is very important. Number one reason to me is because it's beautiful. Number two, we're going to cover what are the different ways of making ceramic vessels, like the difference between hand building versus wheel throwing, and then the different kinds of hand building. There are three main kinds of hand building that we'll cover. We're going to cover the different types of clay. There are three main types of clay bodies, but as when I do the lecture, I will explain there's an infinite number of types of clay, because the difference between stoneware and porcelain is a gradient. It's not a fixed rule. So one person might have a formula that's porcelain, but has just a little bit of stoneware, a little bit of earthenware involved in it. We cover some of the main terms that you need to know related to ceramics. And then the rest of the lecture is me, talking a little bit about some of the ceramics that I find most beautiful, which is primarily ceramics from Tang and Sung Dynasty China, and then how that influence led to the ceramics tradition in Japan, and how that led to ceramics influence in the West. Now, in the West, people have been making ceramics, right? Like in Europe, going all the way back to, well, even before the Romans, right? The Romans had they had an industrial scale of making ceramics. And so the European countries never lost that, like the European peoples. Even when the Roman Empire died, people were making ceramics in Europe. But by the time we get to the 20th century, ceramics had become a very industrial thing, where it was made in factories rather than made by ceramicists, made by potters. The old-fashioned potter studio was kind of like a thing of the past. But this here, I'm talking about the story of a number of people, but specifically Bernard Leach and Agata Kenzin, who kind of re-imported the tradition of a potter and a potter studio, a ceramic studio, where you know a, one artist or a few artists together work on making handmade pottery, um, and so and that activity of bringing the the Japanese tradition to England and to North America, and then later to other parts of Europe, that led to the kind of the 20th century tradition of ceramics becoming more of an art form rather than just a utilitarian industrial product. And that leads then to me talking about contemporary ceramics, which is very fun. Then a little bit of a side where we talk about sculptural ceramics as opposed to vessel forms. And then we get back into talking about Greek ceramics, which is probably where I'll end. So in the Greek ceramics, right? Let's go to this page. One of the things you'll need to know is you need to know what an amphora is. That will come up in Unit 3. It'll be on the test. But I also cover some other ones. I'm a big Kylix is a Greek vessel type that might appear on extra credit questions, and hydrias might be there. But the most important thing is just knowing what an amphora is, and it maybe also possibly knowing what the difference between an amphora versus other like different types of amphoras, like a Panathenaic amphora. A Panathenaic amphora is specifically an amphora vessel that was made to be a prize in the Panathenaic Games. And so here we have the story of the Orientalizing influence, or like as I prefer to say, the Persian style influence, where we can see the Persian influence on the Lydians and the Lycians and the other people who were living on the coast of Anatolia, including on Greeks who were living on the coast of Anatolia, and then those people's influence on the Greeks. And a lot of these are from Corinth, which from this time period all the way through to red figure, Corinth was one of the centers of ceramic production. And so the Orientalizing influence leads to black figure, right? And that black figure is where you paint most of the pot black, but you leave kind of a window of red clay. And then you paint the figures black on that red clay window. And then you scratch into the figures to make the internal line drawing of the figures, right? And that could be just a kind of a basic sort of line drawing like this prize amphora right here, or it could be really detailed, like the way with a stylus scratching away those lines, making all of that pattern on the cloaks. Ajax amphora. And then the next phase is kind of like a complete and total flip. It's what we call red figure. And this is where we might make kind of like a window, but then in the window, instead of painting the figures black, we paint just the empty space, the negative space black, leaving the figures just the red of the clay, and then coming back with a brush and doing the line work with the brush instead of doing it with a scratch away stylus. Okay. And this is important for a number of reasons, but probably for me, one of the most important reasons is a great way for you to visualize the importance of positive and negative shapes, because the transition from this, which is very literal, right? Where the idea is you put a positive mark where you want the positive thing. I want a person, I put a mark down to be the person. Whereas with these, you have to paint it in reverse. You have to be like, where I want to paint the person, I leave it blank. I just paint the space around the person to make the person. It's a much more abstract way of thinking about shape, and that will lead to our lecture later on figure ground, which I might be able to do tomorrow afternoon. Okay. Alea, do you have any questions?
Yes, sir.
All right. Anna, if you have any questions, you could type them in the chat. All right, well, we have done about 40 minutes. So unless there's something you want me to cover, I think maybe we should end there. And yeah, just let me know if you want any more things clarified. Oh, wait, there are 2 new messages. Okay, Anna says all good. Okay. All right, well, then we will end it here. And it's a pleasure talking with you guys. And I will see you a little bit later. Don't forget that there is a lecture tonight at 7:30, and the primary topic of the lecture tonight is prepping for quiz number 1, which isn't very scary, but still it's good to get some prep. All right, thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.